Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another episode of Receivables Podcast. Today, I'm here with my good friend Sara Woggerman with Compliance Business Solutions, and who is also one of the most fun compliance people you could ever hope to meet in our industry. And I know a lot of people don't put fun and compliance in the same sentence, but I think Sara has perfected that balance. But for Sara, for anybody who has not been as lucky as me to get to know you through the years, can you tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Sure. Thanks, Adam. And I appreciate being on the podcast for sure. So I'm Sara Woggerman, and I opened my business, Compliance Business Solutions, 4 years ago now, surprisingly enough. But my journey on how I got there was not your traditional story for sure. I started at, I worked for many debt buyers, 3 to be exact, 2 publicly traded ones, and sort of had this niche for really going into companies and understanding where their gaps were, whether that was from a performance, operational standpoint, or then I transitioned into compliance when the CFPB came around. And so I leveraged that. I had this amazing opportunity because I was always working with our outsourced service providers, whether those were collection law firms or whether those were collection agencies. And had this opportunity where I literally stepped foot in hundreds of agencies and saw so many different ways people were doing things and learning kind of what was working for certain types of programs versus others. And so I finally decided to leverage all of that wonderful experience, and I became a consultant under the umbrella of Roseanne Anderson at Ontario Systems, going on like 9 years ago now. So I spent 5 years at Ontario doing this and sort of building up that consulting sort of book of business. And then I took it out on my own in 2020. And so I have a great passion and love for this industry. I love not only just the people and all the wonderful things, going to conferences, and just I enjoy our group of people, but I also love the advocacy side, the trying to find solutions to complex issues, whether that is the use of new technology, new compliance regulations, but also driving your operational practices while being compliant. That is something I'm extremely passionate about. So that is my little bit about me.
Sara Woggerman story. No, and it's really great because it provides you with an opportunity as a reformed consultant myself. It's going into all those different those different organizations and getting a better feel for all of the different ways in which something can be done, because there's more than one way to do any particular task, and to get to learn from all these different experiences, and then to be able to help other organizations learn from what you've learned, and not only to look at the challenges that come across from a regulatory standpoint, but to help find solutions to those problems, right? Finding ways to still get things done when there's new walls and borders being put up around you constantly, whether that be on a state or a federal level. But for anybody who's not familiar with Compliance Business Solutions, can you tell us a little bit about what you do there? I know that you're doing RMAI certification audits, but you guys do so many different things. What's the core of the business?
We have a wide spectrum to sort of meet the needs of every size organization and each complexity of each organization, right? So we do things, yes, we're an authorized auditor for the RMAI certification program, which I am a huge advocate of. Obviously, I've been a certified auditor for many years, almost since its existence, actually. But beyond that, we do things from both sides of the spectrum. So for the larger companies who might be preparing for, say, a regulatory exam, specifically maybe the CFPB, we have very robust compliance risk assessments that go through not only everything that's in the Bureau's manuals, their examination procedures, but also factors in the other laws that the CFPB doesn't touch, like the TCPA under the FCC and things like that. We'll also weave in there litigation risks and state laws, right? So
Okay.
when we assess a specific component, for example, of risk, we're looking at, okay, here's your regulatory risk, here's your potential litigation risk. And we all know in this industry, those two don't always speak to each other or coincide well. So,
Sure.
we actually have an algorithm that provides you with a risk scale, and then we provide you with recommended remediations based on our risk analysis, right? And
Okay.
so there's a nice framework. So that's one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is there's a lot of smaller and mid-sized companies that, can't afford maybe the type of chief compliance officer, or they don't have the skill set within their existing organization that they might need to attract new clients, to meet the regulatory demands. Maybe they want to grow, they want to become bigger. So we can act as a fractional chief compliance officer for companies. We can build their compliance management system from the ground up. We can help with one-off projects. I work with a lot of debt buyers, and I run their service provider oversight program, because that is what people know me as being like something that Sara Woggerman did the most in the industry and was good at. So, they're like, help us build this framework. And we know if you're a passive debt buyer, the CFPB is going to really hone in on your service provider oversight program, right? So there's a lot of things within there, and we do customized one-off projects. Some companies say, we want you to come in once a year and talk to our board of directors about the state of the union of the industry, and kind of make sure that they understand where things are going, because maybe it's better to hear it from a third party. So we support operations of all sizes, and I've got this really amazing team that has been around for a long time, that really can hone in, and we try to match the right consultants with the right needs, and sometimes we're tag teaming that, right? So we've got a really cool projects going on right now where one of my consultants, Deborah Siski, is building the compliance management system, and then the other consultant, Irene, is coming in and she's implementing it all. She's got this great energy. She's talking to the collectors. So Deborah's doing the building while Irene is doing the implementing, and this client is like over the moon with, we could not have asked for a better way to do this, right? And so and we're able to move the needle really fast as a result of leveraging, a team with all sorts of different personalities, skill sets, and backgrounds and experience.
Putting the right people in the right role, Sara. That sounds like an amazing opportunity. And look, having
really
policies having policies and procedures on the shelf is not helpful. Having policies and procedures that are being implemented across your organization is what you're supposed to be doing, and how you build success. But bringing us back to kind of the compliance guardrails of the industry, technology, and those pieces, one of the journeys that people are starting across the industry right now is their journey into artificial intelligence. And so that has been very interesting to see in the TransUnion 2023 survey. They had said that I think it was 11% of organizations were actively using artificial intelligence. I know that needle has only moved a little bit to this point, but there's a lot more people that are looking at it. I want to say it was only 17% of groups that were interested in looking at it last year. Now I want to say it's up in that 40% range. And so knowing that more organizations are getting to go down that path, what advice can you give to somebody as a compliance professional that's looking at implementing that new type of technology?
So this is a fascinating one, right? And so I've been obviously trying to keep up with all the moving pieces of AI. The first thing I kind of just want to, we're going to keep calling it AI because that's the word we all know, but there actually is nothing real about artificial intelligence in today's world. There is no actual artificial intelligence. What we do have is machine learning. We have large language models. And when we get to a point where generative AI can actually create new things and make new decisions based on all those things that your large language models and your machine learning and all this stuff, it kind of builds on, then we will be in a place of true AI. But that is, I'm going to say that, and then I'm going to contradict myself. I'm going to be kind of, a pain in the butt for a minute. But that's because our government, I know this is going to be surprising, is going to put a definition around this, and it's likely going to be very broad. And so AI is going to become the umbrella word that we use for all of these things, even though it's not actually probably the right word to be using. So, all right, clear that off the plate now and say that AI technologies and their implications is something I'm asked about on such a regular basis. And one of the first place, and I think the challenge for chief compliance officers is by nature, we're not necessarily technology geeks, right? Like we are get into the weeds of the laws and regulations, figure out how to comply geeks, right? But we aren't necessarily the first people you think of when you think about technology innovation. And so we're going to have to challenge ourselves and to truly understand what is happening with the technology, which means we're going to have to maybe get into the room of a place that feels maybe above our head, but we're going to have to we're going to have to say, okay, vendor who wants to sell me this tool, help me understand what the implications of this are. Where's the data being, we're going to have to ask all those questions. So thinking through a good place for chief compliance officers to start, or companies to start in general, would be, and we can go through the actual, like what that questionnaire could actually include. But I think a good starting point is making sure that you have the right people in the room to ask those questions, to understand exactly how that's going to work in the background. And that might mean you feel stupid because you think you're asking dumb questions. Ask them, because you're going to have to explain it at some point. So, I mean,
that's exactly it.
Understand that.
Whatever's in the black box is going to have to be explained. The CFPB and other regulators have been very clear about that. Whatever's in the black box is going to have to be explained, whether you're a creditor making making lending decisions, or you're a collector driving workflows. You're going to have to explain what's inside the black box. And I think that from our industry standpoint, there's a lot of different use cases potentially for artificial intelligence. There's different ways in which it can be used that are going to come with different risk levels, right? Having artificial intelligence communicating directly to a consumer comes with a different risk level than having it drive workflows, comes with a different risk level of it notating your meetings, right? So, or converting your notes into structured data. And I think the part of our industry's challenge has been these two worlds of structured and unstructured data. How are you going to start to leverage value here from an unstructured data?
I think that's an amazing opportunity, right? It's an amazing opportunity from an operational standpoint, but it's an amazing opportunity from a compliance standpoint, right? So from a compliance, I mean, we could speed up some of these processes, right? We have a lot of teams that feel like in the compliance space, we got to keep adding bodies because we inherently don't necessarily trust systems. But if there's certain elements of that we can gain a confidence level of, and then we can use our human intelligence, right, for the actual decision making or the final steps or the checkbacks, then we can reduce our time. Like, I don't know a single compliance person who's twiddling their thumbs, right? Like we're all really busy.
Fair.
There's never something not happening in our space. So, when we can free that up, that allows us to have stronger compliance management systems, maybe focus on other areas. I think there's a great way we can use this from an auditing perspective. I'm interested to see how some of those use cases get adopted and implemented. I know those are conversations in some of the circles I'm talking with that are being discussed right now.
It's exception management from my perspective, right? So if you want to use artificial intelligence from the perspective of, let's say, auditing calls, that's great, because it's been, at least my opinion, that you can only have so many live calls listened to on a monthly basis. If I've got 3,000 people that are making phone calls, I cannot hire enough people to listen to all of those calls. And yes, I can randomly sample the calls, and I can, do what most organizations have done historically. Or I could try and leverage a piece of artificial intelligence to identify the exceptions that require manual review. Right? I can't have the system dinging the collector because they said something. I have to make sure that we've interpreted that correctly, and that I've now put that list of exceptions together. So instead of trying to listen to, let's say, 10 calls per collector per month, now I'm listening to the 10 calls where there's a problem. But you also have to change your expectation of what you're expecting to get, because if you're only listening to 10 calls and it's not a 10 random sample, you're only listening to the 10 exceptions. well, then you can't hold them to the same standard, right? From a
Mhm.
scorecard perspective that you once held them to. I'm not saying you shouldn't
Correct.
hold them to a standard, but you have to kind of,
Yes.
yeah,
You
there's a
have
little
to
bit of a give
adjust
and
for
take
that.
there. Yeah.
There's an adjustment there. That's absolutely correct. And so we have seen this with, things like speech analytics for some time.
Hmm.
And it is like that with everything. So, let's just go to what I do with service provider oversight, right? I am
Hmm.
looking at things like call frequency exceptions and exceptions to those rules. And did the third party actually comply with, say, the presumption of compliance within Regulation
Hmm.
F? So, I have built a tool to quickly get down to those exceptions, but it'd be
Hmm.
great if we didn't have to always build a tool and we
Yeah.
had something a little bit smarter behind that, right?
Yeah.
So, I could say, okay, here's my data set. Show me where the potential nonconformities might be, or those
Hmm.
exceptions, as you said, so that I can go validate if we really do have an issue, maybe dispute timeliness or, the language and complaints. We can start drilling down. There's this expectation that we as an industry, regardless of our size, are
Hmm.
doing this very in-depth analysis on our complaint and dispute data, right? The
Hmm.
Bureau very specifically expects us to do this trend analysis. And, you know, I often find this gets missed. Well,
Sure.
what if we had a tool that really helped us identify that, so that didn't feel like, well, like this manual process.
It's also one of the greatest uses of artificial intelligence, right? And again, we're going to use
Mhm.
the air quote artificial intelligence, but that ability to identify trends from large data sets is the most
Mhm.
valuable use, I think, in the short term for artificial intelligence in the space, because you've got a large language model, you've got a model that you're able to start identifying how things are happening over a
Mhm.
period of time instead of just seeing kind of a scattered plot type diagram. You're able to see a much more smoothed out trended diagram, and you don't have to sit there and do the math. You don't have to sit there and start calculating your standard deviation from the norm, right? Like when you can start putting
Right.
more of that into the hands of the computer, it does save a lot of intelligent time, because that's not a
Yes.
thing that that's something that you got to hire a Sara Woggerman for. That's not something that you can hire, some random person in another
Right.
country, outsource that kind of thought. That's a thought driven
Correct.
requirement. So it kind of,
Right. No, it's a lot. And so let's say if I, if it's analyzing all of my complaint data, for example, and it's saying, here's the most commonly used words. Now, probably the first 20 are like what you would assume they're going to be, right? But like, what are those other ones? What are the
sure.
ones that are the ones that should be standing out to you? So the
Hmm.
number one issue with this artificial intelligence, and from a regulator standpoint, is they are convinced there is going to become bias in the
Hmm.
decision making, which we know
Hmm.
exists as humans, also happens already today. We know that's very obvious in the lending space. And the argument, for good reason, has been made that in our industry, it kind of discrimination kind of gets flipped. So, like, your protected classes are more likely to get better deal, things like
Hmm.
that. Is our argument. And but unless we test it, we can't stand on that rock, right?
Yeah.
So we have to be able to show that we have a testing model back. So an interesting thing I have seen develop
Hmm.
is these vendors who say that they are offering an AI solution, they are asking the user in a questionnaire how they're going to test for that. And then the user is saying, wait, isn't that your responsibility? So this is an interesting thing I think we should be looking at as an industry, is who is liable for what? And the answer is likely going to be both,
Yeah, I
both
was gonna say it's
parties.
likely in the contract.
Hmm. Right. But so that's one of those things. So I'm
Hmm.
getting questions about that going, wait a minute, why are they asking me this? Shouldn't I be asking them that? Well, you should be asking them that. But likewise, you're probably going to share some liability with this.
Hmm.
Um, and making sure that it doesn't start getting so much of a mind of its own that it does create, because keep in mind, we are training the machine, the tool, And if we have unconscious bias, we are going to just teach unconscious bias, right? Like
Yeah.
that
Fair statement.
is an inherent thing that, now again, I do think that's probably more likely on the lending side, but
Sure.
that is something we should consider
Yeah,
and think
Goldman
about.
Sachs had that issue when they rolled out the Apple Card, right? Like that was
Right.
very early on. That was one of the first. I'm going to
It's a
say
great
that
example.
that was the first time that it really came out in public and said, "Hey, you know, there is some bias here in the way in which you're doing this because me applying for given equal credit scores, me applying for it, my wife applying for the card are going to get two different credit limits." Well, why is that, right? Like, so there,
Right.
I understand where the I understand where the government's going and trying to protect it. And I think it's important that we always keep an eye on that. I'm going to call it redlining from the real estate side of the world, right? And I think it's one of those things that we always need to keep an eye on. But at the same time, when you've got this massive increase of accounts that's expected, and we're all seeing what the charge-off numbers and delinquency numbers look like across products right now, you've got lower liquidation capabilities on those same accounts. We're going to have to start applying more technology because the margins have already been thinned out. You can't thin the margins anymore. Right? Not so much, right? You can't thin the margins for the agencies and the law firms anymore and still have them want to take your business, right? They might as well be going to do real estate transactions or something else or calls, customer care work. It just doesn't make sense anymore. So I think it's kind of a pivotal moment in time for the receivables management industry as it relates to artificial intelligence. And I think that the application within the compliance world, identifying those exceptions, is a great place to start the exploration, especially if you've got good compliance people watching out for you, because that's the key there, right? You've got to bake it into the whole thing. And like you were talking about, having the testing models and being able to validate and demonstrate for a third party who is not part of the secret conversations in the back room, how did you come to these decisions? How did these tools get put into place? And what things are you doing to protect the integrity of the consumer?
That is exactly correct. And ensuring that, obviously that you can show that consumer harm did not come. So, having that, so we said testing, that's really critical, but then doing a risk assessment on, okay, how are we leveraging this tool? Have we received feedback from our consumer engagements, that says this is either working or it's frustrating? Or, one of the things that, so on top of the potential discrimination, the other thing the Bureau is very sensitive about is the consumer experience and if they get frustrated. So they put out some comments about chatbots specifically, and making sure that if you're using any of these tools that are having conversations or trying to solve problems, whether they're meant like not giving the consumer a runaround, huge deal to them. Huge deal.
Yeah. Well, agreed. And I think that there's a lot of different things that we're going to start to see come out. I think there's a higher risk level in leveraging this type of technology to communicate with the consumer than there is to drive internal processes at this point in time. California's already rolled out their rule as it relates to artificial intelligence, trying to define some of these things. I feel like it's a rather broad rule. I mean, I feel like this computer mouse might be
broad.
Artificial intelligence based on their ruling. Yeah. So, I mean, hey, don't listen to me. But I think it's important that we continue to have these conversations. I would encourage anybody in the industry who's starting to go down the path of exploring with your artificial intelligence to reach out to Sara, have a conversation, because I can tell you, I've learned a lot about what the guardrails should look like through our conversations. And I feel like the insight that she's able to provide through her experiences working across so many different types of organizations really does provide that first stepping stone that you're going to need to understand. Don't just throw it at IT, right? This is a conversation that has to happen between IT executives, the compliance department. And if your compliance department's not prepared for it, then talk to somebody who is.
Which, I know we're getting close to wrapping up, but saying that one of the best ideas I've heard that if you haven't thought about this, I want to share, create an AI committee of cross-departmental so that you're having these conversations with everybody at the table. I think that is very key. If you like, that's step one for your organization if you want to take this path.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I attended a bankers conference. I want to say it was back in March, where this discussion was exactly the discussion. How are we going to be able to leverage artificial intelligence? We can't just have ChatGPT writing things for us. What's that look like? How are we going to build our AR guardrails for our organization? Sarah, I think you hit the nail right on the head. And I look forward to continuing this conversation in the near future. Thank you so much for coming on today and providing your insights. They are absolutely invaluable for the industry. And I think the experience that you lending your experience to me, I really do appreciate.
Thank you, Adam.
For those of you that are watching, if you have additional questions you'd like to ask Sarah or myself, you can leave those in the comments below, as well as I'll have Sarah's contact information so that you can reach out to her directly to continue this conversation. If you have additional topics you'd like to see us discuss outside of artificial intelligence, you can leave those in the comments below as well. And hopefully I'll be able to get Sarah to come back at least one more time to help me continue to create great content for a great industry. But until next time, Sarah, I really do appreciate all of your insights. This has been fantastic. What a great conversation.
Yeah. Likewise. Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for watching. We'll see y'all again soon. Bye, everybody.